Appreciate it. Okay, good morning, good morning, good morning. Diane, do you have the clicker by chance? Okay, thank you so much. How's everyone doing? Good, great, great. So let's actually just take a little roll so I know who I'm talking with. How many nurses do we have out there? Oh, that is awesome. We love you guys. You ED nurses kick tail. So thank you for what you do. How many docs do we have out there? Awesome, that's a great showing for docs. How many administrators or medical directors do we have out there? Okay, great. And then how many pharmacists? Oh man, that's great. And I think what the important thing is here is it takes an entire team to make this change. It really does take your whole hospital coming together and saying, we want to do something radically differently in how we treat pain and how we address this epidemic. And what we're going to do this morning at this opening session is kind of provide a broad overview of, one, the opioid epidemic and what it looks like here in Colorado, and then two, the ALTO program that you are signing yourselves up for and committing your hospitals to. And it gives me a lot of pride to say that this started pretty humbly, just with the task force and with the guidelines that came out. What this room represents is 50 different emergency departments across our state that are stepping up and saying that we want to do something different here in Colorado. And soon, after we finish the training over the course of this year, we hope every emergency department, around 150 across the state, are going to be stepping up and saying that we're going to do something different here in Colorado. So, I get no financial disclosures. If any of you are looking to support an indebted emergency physician, please, I'd love to change this slide, okay? But otherwise, let's just jump right into this epidemic. And it's starting to get a lot of news nowadays, the opioid epidemic in America, a lot of attention from different hospitals, a lot of attention from government. And darn right it should. 64,000 Americans died of an overdose in 2016. 64,000. That's more than the Vietnam War, right? We're talking wartime numbers in a domestic medicine-made tragedy, really. When you think about it, it's 115 people who die every day just from an opioid overdose. When you look at the financials, they're equally stark. Now, on the low end, you have around $78 billion that it costs us a year. On the high end, the estimate is $500 billion a year that this costs us, right? And that's in lost productivity. Number one cause of death in Americans under the age of 50 isn't gun violence, it's not motor vehicle accidents, it's overdose. So I can't overstate how important it is for us as a medical community who care about the lives and well-being of our fellow citizens in our communities to step up and do something about this. What does this look like here in Colorado, right? I think I've asked a lot of you what it looks like, especially you people who work in Denver, and you think about what this opioid epidemic or heroin epidemic looks like, you'd think of someone who's down and out on Colfax, right? We have to stop thinking about our patients who are suffering with opioid use disorder and overdose as people who are just down on their luck or homeless or on the streets using drugs. This is in every facet of our community. And if you haven't been paying attention over the last 2 years, I just point you to who's overdosed in our community over those last 2 years, right? The son of the former mayor of Nashville overdosed here in a Denver hotel room, right? Eric Bolin, who was a college student at CU, his dad, a big journalist who was formerly with Fox News, he overdosed on illegal drugs that he got down here in Denver and took with him back up to college. And then finally, if you don't know the story of Sandy Winnefield, who's basically was second in command of our entire military, right? This kid, Jonathan, who's his son, from a great family, who wanted to be a paramedic and help people, overdosed on heroin last year at DU. A recent study that was done up in Maryland showed that 80% of their overdose victims were employed and had a job. They were going to work every morning. So we have to understand this epidemic more. And a lot of you probably have stories about this epidemic. I'll tell you, since I became the drug guy at Swedish, I'm amazed by how many people have come up to me and said, my mother is really struggling with this. I've got a brother who's overdosed. This is in every facet of our community. If you go down to the Harm Reduction Action Center, they have an overdose wall. This overdose wall has grown precipitously over the last few years because here in Colorado, we have a really significant problem. And if you look at the numbers, right? Colorado has a huge overdose issue. 912 people in 2016, the last time that we had good data. Most of those involved an opioid. The great majority of those involved prescription opioids. And if you talk about people who look at this opioid epidemic, they'll tell you it's triphasic and compounding. What does triphasic mean? It started with mostly prescriptions, and then in the late 1990s to early 2000s, we had a second wave where illegal heroin kind of started increasing our overdose numbers. And now, basically from 2014 onward, we're seeing a lot of synthetic opioids, fentanyl especially, start to permeate the marketplace, get mailed to people, and now we're seeing a third wave. And it's not that the prescription opioids have went away, but they've just built on each other, right? So that's why this has grown so radically. And I think in medicine, we took a look in 2016 and said, oh, thank God, we are getting our house in order. Prescription opioid overdoses have gone from 329 to 300. Well, bad news. 2017 came out. And what we see is that downward blip has been more than erased with our preliminary opioid overdose numbers from prescription drugs. 353, a 19% increase. That's big. That's substantial. We still have a long way to go in medicine to curtail overprescribing and misprescribing of opioid drugs. Now, the death toll is grisly enough as it is, but it only tells a portion of the story. Because for every person who overdoses, who dies from an opioid, there's 10 people who overdose and get taken to our emergency departments, right? There are 32 people who actually come to the emergency department for some opioid-related event. Be it they're looking for recovery, they have an abscess, other things that are related to opioid misuse and abuse. And then, in terms of our country, we have so many people who use recreationally, right? Here in Colorado especially, we used to be #2 for recreational drug use, including opioids, just a few years ago. So when you talk about your high school students, our kids, a lot of them have tried these drugs either at parties, right, or through medicine cabinets where people have kept these drugs. CDC recently came out, just looking at the last year of what's happened with overdoses in our emergency department, and what did they say? 30% increase in 1 year of ED visits for opioid overdose. This epidemic is accelerating, and it's going to take medicine stepping forward to help decelerate it and reverse it. So we look at a lot of scary numbers, and I want to do more than just look at numbers. I actually want to get to the basis of understanding some of the things that help to drive this epidemic. And one of them is pain, right? Pain, that human condition, all of us in life. Pain is unavoidable. How many of you believe that, right? How many of you have suffered from pain in your life? Yeah, everyone's going to shoot their hand up. I mean, it's an unavoidable part of life. But what we've done is we've taken pain and we've oversimplified it and we've pseudo-medicalized it, right? We have this pain scale that everyone asks. How many of you think this pain scale is really, really useful or scientifically based? There's a lot of silence out there. Me too. I'll disagree with you with that, right? And if you go to medical school, and I've recently graduated within the last 10 years, you know what I learned about pain? It's about C fibers that just go up to the brain processes this noxious injury, and that's what causes pain. We have done a great injustice to our medical providers by oversimplifying pain. And when you look at what pain really is about, pain is tremendously complex. Yes, it is about C fibers and your brain kind of sensing noxious stimuli. It's about the biology of pain. But also, pain is significantly about your psychology. How you interpret that pain, you turn it up or you turn it down, and about how you're taught from a very young age about whether pain is okay and a part of life or pain is totally unacceptable. So there's a tremendous amount of social contributors to pain. And I think we've been a tremendous social contributor to pain over the last 30 years because we've told people that we can make all their pain go away. that's a fallacy, right? And you just think about the people who, a lot of you in your clinical practices, you go in and they have a hangnail and you say, what's your pain 1 to 10? And they say, oh, it's a 10, right? And then you got to other people, these old farmers who, their hand has been caught in a trailer and they're mangled. And they go, what's their pain? And they go, it might be a 2. Right? How variable pain is. We have to bring more science to our understanding of pain. So let's talk about addiction, right? Because opioids are one of the only medications that we use to treat a symptom that creates a full-blown disease. Think about that. That's a pretty crappy trade-off. And that disease is addiction. Now, I think most of us, when you talk about, let's say, anything medical, diabetes, coronary artery disease, liver failure, we've been taught about those entities by your scientific training through nursing school or pharmacy school or medical school. I'd say it's totally the opposite when it comes to addiction. I didn't learn very much about addiction in medical school. Who I learned about addiction from was my family and my society. And here's what I learned about addiction. That addict, your uncle, he's just a bad person. He's making a decision to throw his life away and either use those drugs or drink his life away, right? When you think about the terminology we use, someone's dirty versus someone's clean, right? Words matter. And the way we castigate and stigmatize people who struggle with opioid or substance use disorder is just plain wrong. They're a criminal, they're a junkie, they're an addict. I've never seen someone say addict and point out a patient and it be a good thing. And to be honest, in the emergency department, these used to be my least favorite patients to deal with because I totally misunderstood where they were coming from and the fact that they had a medical disease. Now, originally, this had Philip Seymour Hoffman actually as that original picture, but I think we violated some copyright. So now there's this generic guy in a hoodie. But a lot of patients who are continuing to use and abuse heroin or prescription drugs, they know that they're playing with their lives. Philip Seymour Hoffman, the day before he overdosed, called his sister and told her, I know that if I don't stop, I'm going to die. And that morning, he was supposed to pick up his kids from a playground. And instead, he went to the bathroom, took a dose of heroin, which he'd been off for a few days, and overdosed in his bathroom. Now, let's actually understand what addiction is. Let's retrain ourselves what addiction is. First of all, it's not a moral failing. It's a disease. And it has a biologic basis. We all have these parts of our brains called the telencephalon, right? It's the biggest part of your brain. It's got the cerebral cortex. It's got your reward system, right? It's got the things that, one, make you who you are, executive decision making. It's got your reward system that motivates why you do things, right? You do things because you're either going to fear repercussions or because they're enjoyable. Okay? And what opioids do with your first dose of it is they start screwing with the biochemistry that regulates both of those systems, right? It starts screwing with endorphin that drives what you do, with dopamine, right? What it does is it gives you exogenous sources of both of these. And your body is a really smart system. Once you start getting it from outside your body, what does your body do? It stops making it. It stops making it. So what you find when you talk with people who are struggling with addiction is that first they may have been using this to get high and feel good. Once their body stops producing all these, they start using it just to feel normal. And then once they really get into their addiction, they start using it just to not feel sick. Okay? So if I had a person who comes in, a lot of your clinicians, who's got tree trunk legs, they're short of breath whenever they take a few steps. If they lay down, they get short of breath. And they say, I think there's something wrong with my ticker. What are they? They're a heart failure patient, right? If you got someone who's coming in, their blood pressure is 240, they haven't peed in the last 3 days, right? What are they? They're renal failure, right? And if you have someone who now has such bad dysregulation of their telencephalon that they're unable to control executive decision making, right? They say, I know I'm going to die, but I'm still going to use this. where their reward system is so malfunctioned that truly they spend most of their days just looking to not be dope sick or to score heroin or prescription drugs. If you've got someone who's so dysregulated in terms of that, we've been mislabeling it as addiction when we should be calling it brain failure. And that's what addiction is. Addiction is telencephalonic brain failure, pure and simple. And it follows an organ failure modality, relapsing, remitting, right? The great thing is, if you have a kidney that's gone, we have to replace your kidney. If you have a brain that's been down and is really dysfunctioning and is failing, thanks to neuroplasticity, we can recover your brain, right? We don't need a brain transplant for these patients, but we sure as heck need to treat them better and from a medical perspective. So, the reason why you're all here today is because we need action. We need clinicians across our state to step up. And what better clinicians to start with than emergency clinicians, than emergency docs and emergency nurses? Because we see this epidemic in a way that no other area in medicine sees it. We see all the overdoses. We see all the people who are struggling with IV drug abuse and come in with abscesses or with endocarditis. We see the families who at 2 o'clock in the morning are bringing their loved one in saying, we need to get them help. They're finally ready for help. We need to get them into some place where they can get into recovery. These are our patients. This revolution in medicine needs to start with us. It needs to start with you, and it needs to start with your hospital. Fortunately, in Colorado, we're one of the only states with a truly coordinated response, where the nurses, the doctors, the hospital administrators, the hospital system, the Colorado Consortium, we're all at the table. We're all pushing in the same direction. And we need that spirit of collaboration to also take root in your hospital systems, which is why so many of you are here today. So let's take a little time. Again, we want to give you some high-level stuff, understanding the epidemic, understanding the diseases of pain and addiction, but then we want to talk about what you're getting yourselves into, right? Which is this Colorado Alta Project, our state's movement to address the opioid epidemic. We've already gone through our partnerships. It takes a village, it takes a team. The emergency department is the ultimate team sport, whatever other cliche you want to throw out there. And we know that in our state, there's tremendous need. There's an opportunity, and there's a framework that we can build upon with the Colorado ACEP guidelines and our recent Alta work. So, how many of you are familiar with the Colorado ACEP guidelines? Yeah, we published these in 2017. And they are by far the most comprehensive guidelines in the nation, made right here in Colorado by emergency clinicians, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, harm reductionists, all at the table thinking, how does this look and how we can address it from the opioid epidemic from the emergency department. And we came up with those 4 pillars. 1, we sure as heck have to stop prescribing as many opioids and using as many opioids. We have to limit them from the emergency department as much as possible. 2, because we're limiting opioids, we sure as heck still have to treat pain. That's where Alto comes in. There's a whole way to treat pain more scientifically, and I would say more efficaciously than ever before by using multimodal pain control and Alto. 3, in this country, we have an exploding opioid use disorder and IV drug use epidemic. We sure as heck better start caring for those patients and teaching them, if they are going to continue to use, how to use safely, discharging them with naloxone so they don't overdose and die on the streets, and then also giving those patients more help than we ever have before. When those patients come to us and they say, I've got an opioid use disorder and I need help stopping, we have to turn to proven commodities. Scientific things like methadone or buprenorphine or Vivitrol or good counseling. Everyone has a different path to recovery, and we have to become experts in those different paths and how to apply them to our different patients. So, of those first 2 are really what you're buying into. Limiting opioids and Alto in your emergency departments. Of those, Alto especially is something that you're here to learn about today. Now, a lot of you may have learned about Alto, but the exciting thing is this afternoon, we're going to dive really deep into it. If you're a clinician, I'm going to give you as many insights as I can about how to change your practice with Alto. If you're a nurse, You're going to hear from nurse colleagues who've been practicing with Alto about what to know about these medications, how to counsel your patients. And then from pharmacists, high level, how do you stock these medications? How do you administer them? What's the risk? It really is a cool package so that all of us in the emergency department are pushing in the same direction. But here's the principles of Alto. One, we try to use opioids as little as possible because non-opioids are our first-line drugs. And there's a great non-opioid alternative for almost every painful condition. Two, just because you're using other things first line doesn't mean that opioids are off the table. For appropriate patients, you can always use opioids, either as primary modalities or as rescue modalities, right? Three, multimodal and holistic pain control is much better than just giving people opioids. And I'll give everyone an example. I had a young guy, tragic case, who was dying of stage 4 cancer. He'd been treated for years, and he came with intractable cancer pain. When I ran through his medication list, he was on huge doses of basically MS Cotton with breakthrough Dilaudid and breakthrough Percocet, right? I looked through everything that he was taking, and it was all an opioid for his pain. So at first, when he came in with cancer pain, I went ahead and gave him a big dose of Dilaudid. You know what it did? Absolutely zero. So I went back in with him and I talked and said, hey, listen, let's try something a little different. Have you ever had ketamine? I gave him his first dose of pain dose ketamine. I walked out of the room, I walked back in 20 minutes later and he was crying. And I said, oh crap, right? I thought I'd give this guy a bad reaction or something else. And his wife comes up and she hugs me. And she says, this is the first time my husband has been out of pain in 5 years, right? What can you do when you expand your treatment algorithms and you use different things? You go multimodal. You're a scientist about pain control rather than just an opioid monkey. You can do amazing things. So, oops, sorry, I think I skipped over one of those. And to get you started, before you become an opioid expert, we have different pathways that you can all implement in your practices for really common painful conditions, be it kidney stones, back pain, fractures, headache, and chronic abdominal pain. There's a way that are well-established pathways that you can treat all of them with. And then once you get really good at understanding pain, at understanding Alto, you can start using these for all different types of conditions, which is where I and a lot of our colleagues are at, who've started on this program. So again, you don't have to read the small print, but there's a fancy slide you can refer to on your slide deck that kind of goes through all this. There's also your handouts that go through this in great detail so you can implement these pathways in your hospital. And what are the results? And Janet talked with them a little bit. I'm actually going to dive a little deeper into what our results look like in our big pilot study that we just completed last year. First, what did we measure? And what can you measure in your hospitals? You can measure the same things that we measured in our pilot, and CHA will help you do it. One, you can see how much opioid you're giving, how many morphine equivalents you're giving per 1,000 patients, which is a great kind of framework for what your emergency department's doing. You can see how much Alto you're using, right? How many alternatives to opioids that you're using. And as you implement the pilot, you can see one decrease and one increase as your clinicians get better at using Alto. And for our administrators, which is very important, you can see how happy your patients are about this change of care. And I've got good news on all 4 of those fronts. Now, we did this in 10 hospitals. Why 10 hospitals? Because we knew we needed hospitals that represented absolutely everyone in Colorado. We needed big level 1 trauma centers. We needed freestanding emergency departments. We needed critical rural access hospitals. We needed the entire mosaic so that you as an emergency clinician could look at this and say, this can work here in a hospital just like mine. And we showed that this works everywhere if you implement it. Our results, again, 36% reduction in aggregate over our different hospitals, 31% increase in Alto usage, and 35,000 fewer doses of an opioid during our 6-month study. Those are huge. That's a great reduction, nation-leading reduction in many cases. Our hospitals range from 31% reduction to some which were almost at 50% reduction during this study, which is, again, pretty incredible. Now, this is actually my favorite slide. One, because it shows from when we started collecting data in June 2016 to when we ended our data, we actually had a 50% reduction in opioid usage during that time period, right? For the study itself, we had 36, but those emergency departments, over the course of that year and a half, reduced their opioid usage by 50%. Hats off to them. It also shows, that bottom line, that during the study, we actually had a realization of the goals of ALTO, which is one, we're using ALTO a lot more than opioid use medications. ALTO is first line at the end of the study. And that's where that green line crosses over that blue line. Okay? And that's what we want. That's the theoretical change that we want in each one of your hospitals. When you look at all our different drugs, we have pretty dramatic increases in ALTOs, right? Lidocaine increased by 450% because no one was really using IV lidocaine before. We started using it, we started finding out it's efficacious. Ketamine, a lot more people became comfortable with ketamine and giving it for extreme types of pain, your polytraumas, right? Your cancer-related pain that's refractory to opioids. We started using this drug in new ways. We started using Bentyl for abdominal cramping. We started using Haldol for all types of pain, chronic abdominal pain. But I'll tell you, remember that biopsychosocial modality for pain control? If someone has tremendously driven psychologic pain, and that's really what's the big driver of it, I'll tell you that there's not anything more effective than Haldol. And that's how I've changed my practice. All our opioids, bar none, we decreased. We stopped using these drugs as much. When you look at different ones, again, lidocaine and ketamine were our big stars for increases in usage in our emergency departments. Acetaminophen went up. Ibuprofen, strangely, went down by 13%. And I've tried to rectify this, and I actually was talking with a few clinicians, and I found out that one of the reasons why ibuprofen went down was because we were using Toradol so much. Toradol really did increase pretty dramatically. At Swedish, where I practice, in 2016, Dilaudid was the #1 medication given for pain. In 2017, it was Toradol. Right? Dilaudid was #4. So just in my own practice, we've seen pretty radical changes. And that's part of the reason why I think ibuprofen is falsely decreased. If you add Toradol and ibuprofen and you just talk about NSAIDs as a class, we've dramatically increased NSAID usage. Hydromorphone, which is, I think, most people's go-to in a lot of hospitals or emergency departments for an opioid, decreased dramatically. And, oh yeah, sorry. Let's go through the diagnoses. Again, this is just showing the change at that kind of granular level. For kidney stones, we dramatically decreased the use of opioids. 50% of our kidney stones didn't get an opioid. And when you think about how bad kidney stone pain is, that's saying something. When you look at back pain, which we shouldn't be using opioids for a lot anyways, right? They're actually harmful in lower back pain. We've decreased that pretty dramatically too, where it became the #1 modality for treatment of back pain in 2016, and now it's become by far a #2 modality for the treatment of back pain. Abdominal pain, again, we've decreased pretty significantly our usage, and now we're using Altos just as much as we're using opioids for the treatment of abdominal pain. Migraine headaches, which again, American Neurologic Society said, hey, we shouldn't be using opioids with headaches and migraines especially. We've decreased that pretty dramatically as well, but as you see, we still got some ways to go. Even for really extreme types of pain, like arm fractures and leg fractures, we're using Altos more, sometimes alone and oftentimes in combination with our opioids to make that pain control more effective. Okay? And same thing with cancer pain is, for cancer, we know that opioids are still the #1, first line treatment. We're not telling you to not treat your patients who are palliative care or are suffering from tremendous cancer pain without an opioid. You should still do that. You should still be clinicians. And there's some places where opioids are definitely first line for treatment, like cancer pain. But what we're saying is if you go multimodal, you can have some really great results, as that story illustrated before. Now, for our administrators, what did this do to our HCAP scores? What did patients think about not getting as many opioids? They were happy with it. Our HCAP scores didn't drop over the 6 hospitals that submitted data to us, right? And this is, again, this is around study number, I don't know, 7 or 8 that says that opioids are not tied to patient satisfaction. And if you have clinicians who continue to beat that drum, you've got to tell those clinicians that they're wrong, that they can learn to control pain without an opioid and have tough conversations and partner with patients about pain control and not have to feel like they have to give an opioid so a patient is happy, because that's a fallacy. So, limitations, this is always the bummer, right? About this study is, one, it was a pilot study. Two, although we had 10 hospitals and over 130,000 visits that we kind of tabulated up, it's still considered pretty small. We didn't have control hospitals that we kind of measured against to see if there was changes that are decreasing anyways. And then three, we didn't measure other things like ED length of stay, how this change to Alto kind of changed these other variables. So those are things that we hope to study in the future, especially as we roll this out across the state. Conclusions, hey, those guidelines, they seem like they work. Two, Alto is feasible and effective in the emergency department. We should be looking at adopting it. Three, if you change this, if you train your nurses, if you train your doctors, if you train your pharmacists, and if administration is behind you, you can change your culture in your hospital. And that's really what we're looking for, is culture change. And then the Colorado Opioid Safety Pilot should be disseminated around the state. And that's why you're here. That's what we're doing today, as we're starting to sow those seeds and disseminate this to every emergency department across our state. Again, Diane kind of mentioned this to you before, but you're not doing this alone. Colorado Hospital Association and our clinicians are going to help you navigate some of those roadblocks, help you overcome some of those obstacles. We're going to assist you with sustainability. Any of your clinicians can reach out to me personally, and a lot of them already have, if they have any questions or doubts about Alto, and I'm happy to share data with them. And then we're going to help basically identify how we can get this across the state and help you with your data. And the data tools that Dominic provides you are really powerful. If you're not thinking of submitting your data, I'd encourage you to do so, and I think Dominic's going to show off some of the really cool things we can do with data once CHA has it, including giving you specific prescriber information about how they're using opioids and using Altos, which really helps us have conversations with some of our doctors who might not be adopting this the way that we should. Okay, we've already gone through all this. And here's the cool part. Colorado is driving Alto not only across our state, but across the country. And I was just in Washington around 2 months ago talking with different legislators about how we can push Alto across the country, and guess what? It's part of a bill that's now making its way through Congress and making its way through the Senate that hopefully will fund Alto projects across the country for the tune of around $20 million. So what we're doing here in our state is really nation-leading stuff. And we're happy to have you guys join as part of the first wave of changing culture, not only in our state, but across the country. Finally, there's video cameras around, you've probably noticed. And again, we want to give a shout out to Tri-County Overdose Prevention Partnership for just helping us bring this to a much wider audience. To all your fellow clinicians or people who are working shifts right now, you can tell them that they can go get this training online, and that's all thanks to Tri-County. Okay. How much time do we have left? 13 minutes, great. 13 minutes for questions, okay? So if you guys have any questions, then please raise your hand and we'll run a microphone to you. We can also talk a little bit more about anything you want. Opioid epidemic, understanding pain, different pain types, understanding these Alto meds. My gosh, you guys are shy. There we go, there's a question.
I don't really need this because I'm pretty loud, as my nurses will tell you. I'm Kurt Poppenfuss. I work out in Cheyenne Wells and over in Meeker, so I straddle the Great Divide. But what do you do about, working in the ER Altos? I get all that. We've been doing that for a while anyway. But what do you do with these people that are already on this stuff and they're legacy patients? That's been kind of one of my problems that I've inherited as used to be an ER doc, now I'm a general practice guy these days in some of these areas. And they're already on it, Is there a push, or is there a study, or is there some way you recommend or is there somewhere to go to say, here's how you get them off of this, or do you just go, well, they've been on it for 30 years, they just need to live with that till they die?
Yeah. So great. First of all, hi Kurt, good to see you here. Thank you for coming, brother. Second of all, this is a really important conversation that happens in our primary care offices every single day. And those are really pushed forward by the CDC guidelines, right? The CDC guidelines for chronic pain that basically put a kind of a roof that you should not be on over 100 milliequivalents a day, and you should really optimally be less than 80. And what we've seen is primary care clinicians start tapering people back when they're on chronic opioids. Sometimes they taper them back very quickly, and they show up where? In your emergency departments withdrawn, right? Sometimes you have patients just get fired from offices for being on opioids. So, one, it's a really, really difficult thing to figure out what's best for the patient. And here's what I'd say, Kurt, is I'd say, one, the thing that drives you shouldn't be your 1 to 10 pain score. We know that's a pretty crappy scientific driver. It should be about function, right? It should be about function, how that patient is functioning in their daily life. And then two, we can go multimodal with outpatient pain control, with physical therapy, with biofeedback, with psychotherapy, with different medications, also for pain control. We have to, again, infuse science back into chronic pain control the way that we have to infuse science back into acute pain control. So my kind of conclusion, Kurt, is one, it sure as heck is a complicated issue, but a real issue that a lot of people are facing. Some patients should be titrated appropriately, especially if opioids and their medicine cocktails are affecting their function, right? If they're being hypoxic, if they're drowsy all day. Two is we have to start having difficult conversations and selling to our patients that one, while we might be decreasing their opioids, we're going to do other things to control pain, including physical therapy, biofeedback, other medication classes. And then when those patients come into your emergency departments and they have an exacerbation of their chronic pain, the good news is you have a lot more medications and a lot more modalities that you can treat them with than just saying, okay, well, let's just give you a bigger dose of your opioid, right? So, one, great question, difficult question, no right answer that fits for everyone. But again, kind of some of those overlying principles, driving function, going multimodal, doing what's right for each one of those individual patients. And then finally, what I'd say is there's a tremendous kind of new string of what I'd call patient abandonment. Labeling patients who are in chronic pain as drug seekers or drug addicts, and then either taking that as a premise to fire them from their practices or to really titrate them down dangerously. And that's one thing that we really have to avoid. We have to be partners with our patients, even the difficult ones, especially in the primary care setting, about doing what's right for them. Question up here, friend? Oh, sorry, there, then there.
Do the guidelines, or can you briefly comment on the addictive potential of any of the opioids?
Yeah, for sure. So the one in the guidelines that oftentimes gets cited as addictive is ketamine, right? Ketamine is a Schedule III drug. It is addictive. And one, we use it judiciously. So ketamine is not meant to be used for ankle sprains, right? Ketamine's been meant to be used for really significant polytrauma, good for some types of really severe neuropathic type pain. But it is a drug that we want to use judiciously as well as the opioids because it does have abuse potential. Now, when people stand up and say, oh, abuse potential is why we should not be using ketamine, instead just be using opioids, I'd say look at the science and think about both of those drug classes in terms of their potential harms. Ketamine, what happens when you overdose on ketamine? Do those patients die? No, they're just basically comatose for a little while, right? Two, how easy is it to get ketamine on the street? Sure as heck is a lot easier to get either one, prescription drugs, or two, heroin. Three, how bad is the withdrawal from ketamine? Not nearly as bad as the withdrawal from an opioid. And opioid withdrawal, here's another misconception that I hate hearing. Opioid withdrawal isn't life-threatening. What rock have you been living under, right? Sure, people aren't going to have seizures like when they withdraw from alcohol or go into DTs from benzo or alcohol withdrawal. But guess what happens with a lot of our patients who are withdrawing from opioids? they go out and they use an opioid again and they overdose. Of patients who brought to the emergency department and are reversed with Narcan, what's their mortality at 1 year? Does anyone know? 10%. We're talking about 1 of every 10 of those patients is probably going to be dead within a year. What's the mortality that you have from having an MI? 2.5, now it's 6 around, you know? Maybe at your hospital because you guys are doing awesome stuff. But it's around 6, 7% across the nation. And we're talking about people who have MIs who are in their 60s and 70s. We're talking about people who are overdosing who are in their 20s and 30s, right? This is a really deadly disease process. It is organ failure. We have to totally change our mind about how we treat it. And opioid withdrawal, as sure as heck, is a potential fatal disease. Okay? So again, sorry, I'm going on a little soapbox diatribe. But hopefully, interesting information for all of you. Sorry, we had another question right here. And then I see another hand over there.
Are the insurance companies playing?
Insurance companies. Not right now, I'd say. They are playing more than ever before. I'd say because of the tremendous pressures being put by government, by medical societies, and by patients, they're starting to cover things like addiction services more than ever before. They still have significant problems getting alto coverage, right? Lidocaine patches when you prescribe them. And there's a trick for that, the lidocaine patch thing. Lidocaine patches, if you write a prescription, it's around $100 for a few patches. If you tell patients to actually go and just get over-the-counter 4% versus 5% patches, then it's like $10, right? But still, the fact that we have to do workarounds for a lot of these really good modalities is, again, not really acceptable. So yeah, the insurance industry is starting to play more, but it does take good advocacy from us to make sure that they play by the rules that are best for our patients. We got a question there. And then Kurt, I see that you got a second.
I think this is wonderful work. Very excited. My question is, through the continuum of care, so post-discharge from the ED, it's great that we're treating right there in that time with these new meds. But what is the biopsychosocial follow-up through the continuum so we don't just see people continue to cycle?
Yeah, for sure. Great question, by the way. I get this every time, is what do you do when they leave the ED doors? Because you're not going to write them a script for ketamine. Although there are ketamine compounding pharmacies out there. Really, I've never done that. So what do we do when they have them leave? One, you set your patients up for success, right? We used to tell people that we can just treat their pain away. We're going to give you enough pain meds that you're going to go home and be comfortable. For someone who has a fracture, that's not how I talk with them. I say the next 3 days are going to kind of suck, right? You're going to be having a lot of acute fracture pain. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend that you take a combination of Tylenol and ibuprofen together every 6 hours, which has been shown to be just as efficacious as Percocet, right? So one, we're going to set you up for pain control at baseline, with non-narcotics as first line. Now, if I decide that that patient really does have a lot of pain that's going to need a narcotic, I prescribe it separately than the altos. So I prescribe them either MS-Cotton. I prescribe them morphine sulfate, or I prescribe them tramadol, I prescribe them oxycodone on its own. And I prescribe around 10 pills max to get them through that 3-day where their pain's going to be the worst. And then I kind of sell them on the hard thing that, one, the sooner you can get off this, the shorter your pain course is going to be. And that's true. Because opioids, when you look at some of their long-term effects, is they lower pain thresholds. They actually predispose to chronic pain. And especially for some types of pain, like fractures or back pain, there's great animal models that show that they change your neurobiology, they change your glial cells, which are related to turning up or turning down pain signals. So really, a few days that we're doing altos first, a few pills for home, that appreciation that pain is appropriate in your case, and pain is going to be lasting, but it's going to get better. And then a few pills when they have to sleep or when the pain gets really severe that they can use. And that's a hard sell, right? Man, patients aren't super jazzed about this. But I'm honest with patients. I'm upfront with them. And I have real conversations with them besides just saying, let's make this easy and write a script. Because that's surely much easier to give someone 20 Percocets than it is for me to actually sit down with them and talk with them about their pain. And here's the beautiful thing, is now that my nurses know this and our alto experts, we all speak the same language to the patient. So they're getting the same message. And that's the type of culture change that we're talking about, right? Better understanding of pain. That pain is, in some cases, acceptable. Focusing on function. Letting patients know that we have a way that we're going to control their pain, but we're going to do it more safely than just writing them a bunch of pills. We have 1 minute left. I think we got time for one more question.
A quick one. That you mentioned private insurance, but it's also the federal government. I mean, they used to cover lidocaine patches, and then along came Percocet, and it was way cheaper. So the government has budgeted, what, $6 billion to tackle this problem?
Yep.
And I was just in D.C. last week. I will believe that they're really paying attention to this when they start covering altos again, as opposed to just saying we want the cheapest thing to keep our patients happy, and that's when they helped foment this Percocet, oxycodone problem. Comments on that?
There's a lot of drivers to this opioid epidemic. Drivers do include governmental regulations, how people cover different medications. They include misbehavior by drug companies who falsely market opioids as safe, and the poster child for that is OxyContin. And then it involves us clinicians who looked at data that really wasn't good data and decided to accept it and change our practices. So there's enough blame for sure to go around. And I think that it does involve a comprehensive solution, including payers, like insurance agencies, including government agencies who are the biggest payer, right, between Medicaid and between Medicare. And I think that there is growing political will to do more to address this epidemic. But it, again, takes clinicians like you, Kurt, like all of you here, who are standing up and advocating for what's right for our patients, and getting to know your senator and getting to know your congressman and getting to know local government officials and saying, hey, this is what we see on the ground as frontline ED clinicians. Here's how we need to change things to make things work better and to make a better system. So physician engagement in politics, so we can make some of those changes, is really important. Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. I look forward to seeing our clinicians here. And again, we have around a 15-minute break before we get started with our next one. Oh.